All right, section 6.2. We're going to start actually applying our sine, cosine, and tangent functions when it comes to solving right triangles. When we solve a triangle, what it really means is you're finding all three angles and all three sides. Now, in order to do this, they're going to give you 3 out of the 6. They're either going to give you one angle and one side, and you also know that you have a 90-degree angle, or they're going to give you two sides. You have side 1 and side 2, and you also have a 90-degree angle. These are the two types of problems that you're going to have when you're solving the right triangle. You're not going to have any problems here where it's just all three angles, because then you create similar triangles and then you actually can't really even solve that triangle. Here I have a triangle where the angles are the same, and here I have a triangle where the angles are the same. There's no reference between the actual triangles. So these are the only two types of situations you're going to have. So let's look at one of your homework problems here. Let's look at this one. Here we have a triangle. We've got a 30-degree angle that's given to us here. We've got A, and then we've got B, and then we've got this length of 20 that's here. We've also got angle A that's given here and angle B. Now, one thing that's going to be absolutely universal when it comes to the way that mathematicians write the letters here is that the lowercase letter is always going to be opposite the uppercase letter that represents the angle. So the A, B, and C represent the angles, and then you have A, B, and 20 is actually little c here, but we know what it is. But that's going to be universally true throughout the problems that we're going to be looking at here. So now we got to figure out, we want to know what B is. We want to know what A is. And I'll also know what little b is. Okay? Now, big B is actually fairly straightforward. We know that the measure of angle B is going to be equal to 90 minus 30 degrees. Since I know that these two angles add up to 90 degrees, that's going to be 60 degrees. So we can go ahead and we can put that in there. Okay? Now, we want to find out what A is. What we want to do is we want to figure out which trig function we're going to use to find A. We're given this angle. We're given this side. Always try to go back to the given angle and the given side. It makes for less rounding errors. Now here we got nothing, no decimals here, so we don't have to worry about it too much. We could use 60 here, but if you were rounding anything, with these problems later on, then you want to always try to go back to your original stuff. Here's our angle. We're looking for the opposite. We're given the hypotenuse. Okay, opposite, hypotenuse. That tells me that I want to use sine. And then there's the setup for it. So now I have to solve for A, which is pretty straightforward. I'm going to multiply both sides by 20. Cross that over there. And I'm going to get A is equal to 20 times the sine of 30 degrees. Now, when you do this on your calculator, what you want to make sure that you're doing here is that you are in degree mode. So I'm pressing mode right here, and I'm going to make sure that I'm in degree mode. Most of your calculators, especially the graphing ones, are going to start in radian mode. So you want to make sure that you are in degree mode. You press enter to actually select it, and then you do second mode to quit out. And now I'm going to do my problem. I'm going to do 20 times the sine of 30. Okay? And I get 10. Wonderful. So now I know that this side is equal to 10. Now, I could use the Pythagorean theorem to figure out what B is, but a simpler approach is to actually use trigonometry. Here I'm going to find B, and B is my adjacent angle to my, B is my adjacent side to my angle 30, and then I have my hypotenuse of 20. So I'm going to write cosine of 30 degrees is equal to B over 20. Here, I want to solve for B, so I'm going to multiply both sides by 20 again, and I'm going to get B is equal to 20 cosine of 30. 20 cosine 30, type that in. That's going to be equal to 17.3. Sorry, there you go, 17.3. A good way to error check when you're doing this is to make sure that your sides for your legs are these sides that are connected to your right angle, those lengths are always going to be less than your hypotenuse. If this came out to be 25 or whatever, then I know that I probably have this fraction flipped over the wrong way. So now I have all three sides and I have all three angles, so therefore I have solved the triangle. Let's look at a different example on your homework where you're given two sides. Great. So this one, try to save some paper here. So here I have my triangle. I have A, B, and C. Sorry, A, C, and B here. I got little a, I got little b, and I've got little c right here. I got my right angle, and I'm given the fact that I have 150 is b, and then a is equal to, oh, excuse me, c is equal to 450. So now I've got to find a and I've got to find b. Sorry, I've got to find a, angle b, and angle a. So, which trig function do we need? Well, let's find angle A. Let's call this, well, angle A. And angle A is equal to, the cosine of angle A is equal to 150 over 450. Okay, so cosine of angle A is equal to 150 over 450. Great. So now I have to solve for A. There's no way I can manipulate this around, right? But what I'm going to do is use an inverse trig function. And I'm going to take the inverse trig function of both sides. All right. Reality is we're just going to get A is equal to cosine -1 of 150 over 450. So we're using our inverse trig function, which is pretty easy to do on the calculator. I'm going to do second cosine. And we're going to get that cosine and that -1. Remember, that represents the inverse notation for functions. Use 150 divided by 450. Again, making sure that we're in degree mode. And we get 70.5 degrees. Great. Now let's find B. We can do that fairly easily. We could do 90 minus that answer that we got, 19.5. And that's probably completely legit, especially if you use ANS here. ANS is the second negative sign here. It's not showing up too well, but ANS is on the bottom of your calculator right there. That uses your previous answer on the graphing calculator. If you use a scientific calculator, it probably has the same thing. But let's say that we didn't have that. We could say cosine of, the sine of B. We have B here. Little b is the opposite. C is the hypotenuse. Great. So now I can say sine B is equal to 150 over 450. So I can use an inverse trig function again. B is equal to inverse sine of 150 over 450. So I'm going to do second sine of 150 divided by 450, and I get my answer, and it's going to be exactly the same. Now I got to find A. Great. I need to use one of these angles. So I'm going to use A here with 70.5. That's probably going to be good enough for what I had. And now I have to figure out what A is. I can use tangent with this side, the opposite, and the adjacent, or I could use cosine. I'm going to use sine, I'm going to use sine here. The sine of 70.5 is equal to A over 450. So now I'm going to multiply both sides by 450. So I'm going to do the sine, and actually instead of 70.5 here, I had actually a little bit of better answer of 70.52877. I'm going to type that whole thing in. And then I'm going to multiply that by 450. Again, multiply both sides by 450 here, and we're going to get A is equal to 424.2. Now, they're going to give you some leeway here. In the problem, they're going to ask you to round to the nearest whole number. So we'll call it 424. So let's go in and fill in our answers here. A here was 70.5. B was going to be 19.5. And then little a is 424. And there we go. Okay, so solving the triangle, finding all three angles and all three sides. Use sine and cosine and sometimes tangent. You use tangent when your two given sides are these two sides here, then you'll end up using that. Most of the time it's just going to be sine, cosine, and remember to use the inverse trig functions when you have to.